All right. Thank you all for joining us. Like I mentioned, I'm so glad everybody was able to turn up for this meaningful conversation about the Black Justice Strategy. We're going to be getting into a very, very great discussion. We have a full panel, all experts, all very knowledgeable individuals who are immersed in this topic and have different areas within the recommendations that they'll be speaking to. There'll be questions. We're going to get into that. So it's about 45 minutes or so. We're going to take a brief pause, and then we're going to come back, and we're going to open up this mic that's going to be here in the center for a Q&A. So if you like, that's going to be time for, your questions, your comments. You can direct them around the topic, the report, or to a specific individual if you so wish. But don't bar that just to the panelists that we have the privilege of speaking with today. This is conversation, meaning back and forth dialogue. If that's to any particular comment that anybody else has, please, that's what these forums are for. Okay? And so without further ado, I'm so sorry I'm standing right in front of you.
That's fine.
I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. So if we shall, we would like to acknowledge the land in which we live, work, and raise our families. As we pay tribute to the many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people that were the original stewards of this land, we also want to acknowledge forcibly displanted Africans brought here involuntarily through the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. The CEE team is grateful for the opportunity to utilize the space to deliver our services that support and empower the Black community that now calls this city home. So without further ado, thank you very much. I'd love to hand it over to Trinae Hancock, our Senior Programs Manager, to get this discussion started.
Thanks, Matthias. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. I'm very excited to start this conversation. It's my pleasure to welcome you all here today for this discussion on the Black Justice Strategy, justice reform, and community engagement. Thank you, Avando. Shout out to our IT team for setting this up today.
Always.
We're truly honored here at CEE to have such distinguished panelists here with us today. And so I'll start by letting everyone introduce themselves so you can know the context in which they're speaking. I'll start with Lieben.
I think we should start with Senator.
No.
Good afternoon. Great pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation and for the engagement. My name is Lieben Gabriel-Mikhael. I'm the CEO at Taibu Community Health Center.
Hello, everybody.
Hello. Hi.
I love it when people answer. I'll say hello and I'll say bonjour, and I'll also say Nyawa, which is Mohawk, because my home community is Cornwall, Ontario, and it's on the traditional territory of the Mohawk people of Akwesasne. I still live in Cornwall. I was the mayor of Cornwall. I was the first woman mayor of Cornwall, and I am the first Black woman mayor elected in Ontario. Yeah. It's very proud of that. It was also a really lonely space. Still is.
Yes.
And from there, I was appointed to the Senate in June of 2021. So I have been a senator now for 3+ years. I am part of the African Canadian Senators Group. So it's the first time I go into a workplace and there are others that look like me that are already in a caucus waiting to work, for us to work together. So there are 8 of us. And part of the work that we do as senators is to talk about what the Senate is, because most people don't know what we do. But also part of the reason for being here today is because in addition to being a former mayor and a senator, I'm also a legal aid lawyer. And I spent most of my career practicing poverty law. I sit on the Legal and Constitutional Affairs Committee as a senator, and I have been interested in the Black Justice Strategy, waiting for it. And now we have it. We have 114 recommendations, but we need to talk about it. We need to understand it, and we need to have this type of community conversation. So that's why I'm here, and I'm glad to be here.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nicholas Marcus Thompson. I am the Chief Executive Officer for the Black Class Action Secretariat. We're a nonprofit organization that is utilizing strategic litigation and advocacy to dismantle the systemic barriers that Black workers are facing in employment. Right now, we have a landmark initiative at the federal level. We have 99 departments and agencies before the federal court for discriminating against Black workers, decades of discrimination, which we found have largely disproportionately impacted Black women. So we're before the courts right now seeking redress for decades of discrimination, seeking legislative changes, mental health support, really legacy work to ensure that, Black people can work in government, work anywhere, and realize their full potential, regardless of their skin color, and have full access like everyone else. So the Black Justice Strategy is part of that, and I'm happy to be here to talk about that, the economic aspect of it, the determinants that the policy talks about, and employment is a large part of that, understanding those structural barriers. So, and this is really transformative. So we're going to unpack some of that and see how far we can get today. But community engagement is really, really important, especially we're having an election period coming up. So we have to ensure and push collectively to ensure that these recommendations are implemented. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My introduction is going to be as short as Libet's. My name is Adana Ling, and I am the Social Support Director at CEE. And just as Nicholas pointed out, it's just a phenomenal place to work because you're surrounded by people who look like you're doing work that is meaningful to you. And we have the privilege of being able to serve youth who are in need of advocates because we know that we live within a system that just destroys and breaks down. And we have the privilege of being able to do some of that work to rebuild and to repair. And so I'm just really excited about the conversation and truly humbled to be among this panel with such powerful trailblazers, and just really looking forward to the learning and the conversation that's about to happen.
Thank you, everyone. I'm very excited to start off this conversation. I just think it speaks to kind of how we move through the world to have such different perspectives all on the panel. So excited to hear the answers to my stack of questions. One thing I will say before we get started, if you haven't had a chance to check out the strategy, Matthias will be sending that out to all the registrants. So if you've come here today and not necessarily registered, connect with Matthias, who was here in the gray suit. There we go. Yep. And he will send that to you directly so that you can get a chance to read it. It is also on the Government of Canada's website as well. So I'm going to start off with a question. Some of these questions are compact, so I know you guys have seen them, but anything you need me to repeat or highlight, feel free to just stop me and send me back and I'll start again. So a key highlight of this report is the overrepresentation of Black Canadians in the criminal justice system. Racial profiling and over-surveillance remain major issues in Black communities. Given the context, what specific reforms or actions are necessary to rebuild trust between the government, law enforcement, and Black communities? And how can accountability be ensured at all levels? I'll start with you, Senator.
It's a big question. Mm-hmm. It's a trust question. So as a senator, so senators are appointed, by the way. We are not elected. The Prime Minister of the day appoints us, usually because we've done things in our lives, and so we tend to be a little older. The average age in the Senate is 67. And so it's important for us, I think, if we're going to do our jobs properly, is to come to community and particularly pay attention to youth, because their voices are not in that chamber. Part of my work as a senator has been to go into prisons. I work with Senator Pate, who has spent her career doing that. As senators and parliamentarians, we have access to prisons. They cannot stop us from going in. So we have organized events to go and speak to people in those federal institutions. We celebrated Black History Month together because the prisoners felt disconnected from community and wanted that. And when I sat with them, there was max security, minimum, medium, and minimum. And in the max security, more than 90% of those men were Black men. And so we know the statistics. I mean, you can find them online. They're out there. But to sit in a maximum security room with 90% Black men looking at me going, do you see us here? And these men were not asking for excuses. They were not making excuses. They were there doing time for things that they've done, but they wanted to talk about what happened in their lives and how they ended up there. And they wanted to talk to a Black senator because they figured, you know, you're out there. We don't get talked about. This is a statistic for people. So for me, this is about, this justice strategy is about how do we speak to what's going on there? How do we connect to communities? How do we prevent things from happening? How do we make sure that people there can see their way out of that, rehabilitate and come back into their communities? So it's a big anti-racism, systemic discrimination piece. And it's why I went into politics in the first place. So as a legal aid lawyer, I was helping one person at a time. And when I sat around a council table, I could vote on budgets that would expand recreation programs to make them accessible to people who were lower income families. So that kind of stuff is why I'm here. It's the big picture stuff. It's the mental health issues. It's the social work stuff. The justice stuff, we have to talk about that. As a lawyer, I can talk about that. But I'm at this stage of my career more interested in having the conversations about systemic racism and how we're going to invest in our communities to prevent that.
Thank you. Adana, what are your thoughts on this question?
So when I hear the question around trust and what we need to do to rebuild trust, I feel like, to me, the responsibility is solely on the government to earn the trust of community. We are at a place where community doesn't trust because we have been let down and disappointed time and again over years. Like, this distrust and this lack of faith in the system didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen because we woke up and decided, I don't want to trust the government anymore. Like, it has happened because of the experiences that folks have had. So in order to rebuild trust, there needs to be action. There needs to be action. This strategy needs to be actioned. It cannot be like the other strategies that we've seen in the past, because we're not new to this. This isn't the first strategy. This isn't the first consultation. This is not the first. We need to get to a place where we see the strategies and the recommendations actually being actioned in order for trust to be earned. Rebuilding trust looks like actually engaging the folks who are most affected by this, like by the conversation we're having. Like, not just consulting, but actually allowing them the privilege and the opportunity to lead the reform, to do the actual work that is necessary to see the systemic change. Rebuilding trust looks like listening and funding the folks that are needed to do the work on the ground. Like, it cannot just be a conversation. It cannot just be a document. It cannot just be another, you know what I mean? Like, another process. Like, it has to be action, and folks need to feel like they have not just a voice, but that they have impact. And I think when we talk about rebuilding trust, those are very key pieces. Like, we've had the privilege or the opportunity to go into federal institutions, and just like the senator is talking about, people feel like they cannot trust the system because it was never created for them. So a lot of folks feel like, okay, I'm benefiting from the system. But when we talk about Black communities, that same level of I'm benefiting from the system isn't there. So the responsibility and the onus is on the government to put their money where their mouth is, to actually action the recommendations that are constantly being made. And when we see those changes, then trust will start be rebuilt. Yeah.
Thank you both. I think the thing that comes up for me, and you guys are both talking, is that you guys both came from Black communities, and now you're working outside of those Black communities to now connect back. And I feel like there's always that missing link of those who are not from the community, just like, oh, okay, I'll watch you work, but I won't necessarily aid your work. And I think I hear that from both of your sentiments. Thank you. Okay, our next question. How can we ensure that Black communities are continuously engaged in implementation process and hold institutions accountable for achieving goals aligned with the strategy? I'll start with you, Ruben.
Thank you. Thank you for that question. Again, it's another big question. Big words in the question. Engagement and accountability. I think engagement is easier. We're trying to do that today. And I think engagement is also connected to trust, because if the community does not trust the system, then how they would engage with anything that comes from the system is going to be something to consider. How government also tries to engage communities is also very important. Many times we see, like when we talk about community engagement, it's about information sharing. Sometimes it's consultation and, just consultation and nothing else, nothing follows up. Sometimes there is involvement, but from Taibu's perspective, what we're trying to kind of emphasize and work on is engagement has to include empowerment of communities and building their capacity. So it's not just me, I have an idea or I have a strategy and I'm going to share that information. Maybe I'll ask a few questions to say, is this right? Does this feel good? And then go back and say, I have engaged the community. I think there should be an ongoing relationship with communities in building their capacity and empowering them to have ownership of what is being proposed. And I think that's the first thing. And that's when we get close to accountability. I think accountability is a challenge, especially for racialized Black indigenous communities, that in order to create accountability, you have to have some kind of power, right? So, and when I talk about this, I usually use our situation as fundees from the government. For example, we're funded by the Ministry of Health, and we have an accountability agreement. And the accountability is, we're giving you so much money, and we're expecting you to do X, Y, and Z. If you don't do those, or you don't meet those targets, there is a risk that we will take the money. So because we're accountable to that process and relationship, we make sure that we're doing all the things that we're expected to do. And now, so the power belongs to the funder and the accountability rests with the community. How can we change that? Can the power remain with the community and the community saying, government or systems, we're going to hold you accountable to what you're saying, right? So that shift of mindset is going to be very important. And it can only happen with engagement, close relationship, empowering communities, building that relationship and trust. Because for communities to engage with systems, they need to be able to trust them, to get closer, to have that negotiation. They need to feel empowered to say, no, this is not going to work for us. This is what we require from our perspective, and that relationship and negotiation happens. That's why I'm saying accountability is very tricky, but it's possible. It is possible if the system is willing to work with communities to create that accountability with the ultimate aim of saying we're creating this because this is important. I think the the justice strategy is a significant piece of work. Many of our communities don't know this is happening. So it is very, like, the empowerment starts with that, by engaging. So government has a responsibility to engage. We all, as communities, we also have a responsibility to engage. We've been asking for this kind of things for years. It is on our doorstep, and we need to get and do that relationship. So this being a very significant piece, and I was saying to somebody else earlier on, like, we don't have too many Black strategies. Like, this could be probably one of the first strategies that is coming out from the federal government. Mm-hmm. There's a housing strategy that is being done, which is good. We need a Black health strategy. We've been saying this for a very, very long time, and I've been talking to ministers, every change of cabinet, I've spoken to all the ministers. These strategies are important, because without these strategies, we're going just to be doing small things here and there. The strategy gives us the journey, the map of where we need to get to with those key areas. So it is a very significant piece of work that we need to engage with as communities. and working with government officials to make sure that engagement is on an equal partnership. That the government should, give away a little bit of power to say, I'm ready to be held accountable by the community. If I have all these recommendations, I will stand to say that. A very good example I want to give, and I always give shout out to my colleagues from the city, the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Action Plan is a good example. The city committed to coming up with a plan, and they've also created an accountability system whereby we can hold my dear sister Kimba over there to say, are this being done? And they're also engaging with the community to say, keep us accountable. That relationship needs to exist. This Black justice strategy is significant. Maybe it's a good time to show this leadership of where we create that accountability that will pave a way for a Black health strategy, a Black mental health strategy, a Black housing strategy, an education strategy. Those kind of things can then follow, because this could be a very good example.
Gosh, my mind is going in a million directions. Thanks for that.
So is mine as well.
Yeah.
Thanks, Leland. Adana, I would like to pass this question to you, but something came up when Leland was talking, and I think that you have a pretty unique youth perspective, having worked front lines in SST with youth. While Leland's talking about accountability, we know that strategies like this need to be handed to the next generation as well to pick up. I'm an 8th generation Canadian. I know my family's stories. 8th generation Black Canadian from Nova Scotia. I know my family's stories. I know what this strategy can mean for past generations. How can we keep the youth connected to these systems so they know how to hold things accountable from their voice, if I may?
I think going back to what Leland was saying, a lot of this really goes back to the issue of trust, right? We need to prove to the youth that we want to pass the strategy on to, that they can actually trust that the work that they do, the effort, the effort that they put in will actually be meaningful and impactful. One of the things I think about when we talk about this is the concept of learned helplessness. And it's that idea or that state that you enter into when you lack the motivation or the drive to do something, because in the past, everything you've done has resulted in nothing. There's been a lot of effort and low impact. And I think when we have youth who are growing up seeing this, like they've seen generations try and fight and put in the effort and do the work, and they've not seen the impact. If we want the generation that is coming to pick this up and to run with it, then we have to show them that we are indeed trustworthy. Yes. We have to show them that they don't have to keep rebuilding the bridge every single time, but that they can actually walk through on the bridge. And I think, again, like Leland was saying, a lot of it has to do with empowerment. How are we empowering or giving power back to, sharing power with the people that we want to pick this up and run with it? One of the stories that come to mind, even as we talk about going into the prison systems, you have brilliant youth, you have brilliant young adults there that are just brilliant minds, brilliant thinkers, want to do things, but the system continues to tell them that what you try to do does not matter. And that doesn't just start there, like it happens in our school system. So how are we addressing our educational system to let folks know or to encourage folks to use their voice, to advocate? Like, how are we taking those conversations seriously? Because that's where it starts from. If at school they don't have a voice, why would they think they can come in community and have a voice? If at home, and we don't like to talk about that a lot, but if at home we don't give them that power to advocate for themselves. I'm not saying be disrespectful, but they have to learn to talk back to power. If they don't learn that at home, where are they going to learn it? If they can't do it at school, what makes us think that we can just expect them to take up this huge thing and try to run with it if we've never taught them how to do it on a smaller scale? Even in organizations like this, even in organizations like Taibu and wherever else that we work with young people, if we don't share power with them in those spaces, they're not going to get the courage that they need to do things outside of those spaces. Like, we have to do that inside first so that they feel empowered enough to do it outside.
Thank you, Adana. I also think identifying, I also think identifying the institutions are very important. So we say school, it's an institution, right? It's not just the government. We learn careers in grade 9, and that's a governmental institution, but there's institutions that we're born in an institution, we're born in a hospital, right? So it's integrated from the second that we're born. Thank you, Donna. Thank you again.
Can I just add a point on this?
Absolutely.
Because I think it's really, really critical. When we're talking about these structures and implementation and engaging the community, I think adding to that dimension of empowerment, empowering our people in decision-making roles. One of the things the government has, or governments has done when they're doing these initiatives, they engage you at some level in the consultation process. And then when it comes to implementation, it's usually non-white people who water down the implementation. And then we end up with some measures that are not tangible, that leaves our community back at the same position that we started. We have a perfect example that's happening, as we speak in the public service. What we've seen is that when it comes to the mental health aspect of workers, we've seen many workers face discrimination, and when they contact EAP, Employee Assistance Program, or try to get help, they usually go to a white counselor, and they're told that it's their perception that they're being discriminated against, causing even further harm. So we've pressed the government to create a Black mental health program, a culturally sensitive mental health program by Black professionals, administered by Blacks all around. And the government has agreed to do that, and they've put aside $50 million to do that. And they started implementing this program, and it was all white people doing it, creating a Black mental health program. And then, when there was pushback, they brought on some Blacks to do work at the lowest level. At the lowest level. And when these workers created a plan that would, impact the community, because you can't just create a mental health program and then that is helpful, and then you go back in the workplace and face discrimination. That's very much counterproductive. So they created this plan, and when they would go to the deputy minister to present it, well, why do you need this plan? What you hear all of these comments of why this is needed, and that lack of lived experience. So the government, and with regards to this strategy, can ensure that Black people are in the decision-making and implementing roles to ensure that this is executed, because this would quickly get tabled. If the right leadership is not in the right places, because politicians are in one place and the bureaucracy that's responsible for implementing this is in another place. And if they don't believe there's systemic discrimination, the politicians can say whatever they want. It is the bureaucracy that will implement this plan. So ensuring that there are enough Black voices in decision-making roles to implement this policy, and in general, I think that's the type of empowerment that would help to get these policies advanced.
Thank you, Nicholas. All right, our next question. One of the strategy's goals is to reduce incarceration rates of Black, okay, I'll start that again. One of the strategy's goals is to reduce incarceration rates of Black Canadians and Indigenous Canadians by 50% in 2034. What is the most critical first steps in addressing this issue across policy, courts, and corrections? What is the most significant structural barriers to achieve this goal? Nicholas, I'm going to come to you first for this one.
Well, I think as a first part, when we think about this, the policing is often the first point of contact with our community. And we know that our community is over-policed. all the reports, demonstrate that. So I would say a first step and a critical step is addressing the issues, the structural issues within the policing system and over-policing, ensuring that there are alternatives to address. We've heard this from our community. When there are mental health crises, you don't send a tactical unit in there. So addressing all of the structural issues with law enforcement, I think that is really the first step in addressing the system. And then we go to the court system, and the entire system is from the sentencing to pre-trial to the entire system. It contains the structural barriers, and the system is not designed to be rehabilitative so you get in there and it doesn't give you the support to get out. So you're facing barriers in the pre-stage, in the court system. You face the barrier at the first level in the policing system, where there's biases and prejudice that you're likely to not get the benefit of the doubt or treated indifferently. And then you get to the justice part of it, and the prosecution and the judge, there's structural biases there as well. And then you serve your term, and then you're not rehabilitated. And so we have to address all of these systems at all levels, and we can't just address one and then we don't have any rehabilitative systems. We don't have any mental health support systems. We don't have mandatory training across the board, across systems, in terms of addressing the biases. So we really need, at the policing system, to ensure there's mandatory training there, to ensure that the structural barriers and biases, and also stop hiring racist cops.
Please.
So throughout all of our different systems, we need to go in and address those structural barriers.
Yeah, I think so.
Can I just add? I mean, it's very, very, great response. I would add maybe one more component. I think, from how we are trying to address some of the issues we do at Taibu is we have three pillars or three goals, right? Prevention, restoration, and advancement, right? So I think we need to go a little bit further than policing and look at the other. We usually saying social determinants of health. Somebody said yesterday, structural determinants of health. Maybe now we can call it justice determinants of health, but things start much before interaction with the police, and these are also very systemic problems, right? And we know them: the income, the poverty, all the other things that are happening that are then exposing us at a disproportionate rate to be then in that. So those are great points. So I would add the prevention piece, which I think is included in the strategy, is talking about some of the health and wellness and social justices as well. So,
thank you for that. I was actually going to say, do we think the normal phrase or the regular phrase is school to incarceration pipeline? I think it's birth to incarceration pipeline, because if let's say you're a Black woman, you have a baby, and your doctor is white. Let's say your baby has spina bifida. If that doctor does not know what that is, your child can, or even a hernia, even a cold that's common consistently. These are all things that can prevent your child from being regular in school. So then now your child's not a child that shows up in school, so the teachers are not investing in them, right? And these are all things that are tied to race. So I would say, I agree with you, Levin, and I think my question was definitely limiting, but I will say that it starts at birth. It starts at inception, the way the mothers are treated, the way the mothers can show up, the way their community looks around them when they're having a child. We know that communities are fractured now. So yeah, I think those are points. Senator, I'll pass the question to you.
I want to come back to municipal for a bit, and I want to shout out like you did. There's people from the city here.
Yes.
Yeah. So the city, municipal government is, I think, and I know I sit here as a senator, but municipal government is the best government, is the closest government to the people. And so if we're talking about empowering communities, city governments are generally the ones that are best suited for that kind of work. And I want to come back to some of the things you were saying. I fully endorse your analysis of the question, and I agree that we need to go further back as well. It's about representation too. So your point around where do we see ourselves at all of these levels? You know, are there sufficient Black judges? Are there sufficient Black lawyers? Are there, you know, Black police officers? Are there Black parole officers? Not enough. And so as long as we're not represented in all of those spaces, you're going to get policies that are not a reflection of what we really need. So representation really does matter. And we have to do all the things at the same time. And that's what municipal governments understand, right? They have to build infrastructure, build relationship. They have to also take away the snow, take away the goose poop in the park. They have to do all the things. And so we have to do all those things. To your point about building relationship, that's not just about consultation, right? It's about showing up, just showing up. We're not just going to show up during Black History Month. We're not just going to show up when we need something from you. We're not just going to show up when we need your votes. We're going to show up when you're celebrating something. We're going to show up to cut a ribbon for a Black business. We're going to show up at, you know, a retirement of somebody a Black person who spent his career in public service. Like, we're going to just show up. And I think that we've lost how to build relationship. So that's a very important piece around trust. This will gather dust, as others have, if we don't, if you don't know what's going on with it. Because election cycles are what they are. And that takes up the energy. But if community knows that this exists, then you are not going to allow the next government, the government after that, to forget that work has gone into this. This was developed by Black people. There was some lived experience. And you know, as Black people, when we are designing things, we bring our own lived experience to the table. Emotional labor. So in addition to being a lawyer, and you bring those qualities, you sit around the table and you go, oh yeah, well, this was a microaggression here. I was a victim of racism here. You're bringing your own personal experience into the work that you're doing. And I think we need to recognize that Black people can get tired doing all the things, being all the experts, and also bringing lived experience. So I think that, to your point earlier, this can be connected to a lot of good things if we implement, but it has to be in your hands. If you leave it in the politicians' hands, they are going to get distracted by the million things that they have to do. But if you know that this exists, if you talk to us about it, and you don't forget that this exists, that's how we're going to make this connect to all of the other things that we want to do as Black Canadians.
Thank you. Okay, the next question's a long one, so bear with me while I get through this. Okay, amongst the report's recommendation is a target resourcing for a Black-led organization. Long-term sustainable funding of initiatives that promote health and well-being for Black individuals and communities is desperately needed. Beyond support for specific programs, sustainability funding for permanent institutions is also required. In our estimation, how can the government ensure sustained long-term funding for Black-led organizations to deliver community-based solutions? And what additional support is needed from the government for the correctional system? I'll start with you, Lee-Bin, as the ED of a Black health organization who receives government funding.
Thank you. Thanks. And I think it follows from what the senator just ended up by saying, that we have to be involved. This has to be in our hands, but capacity is an issue, right? When things have not existed for a very, very long time, and now we're saying, okay, we need to do this, that is a significant issue. So resourcing of the appropriate people, organizations that are going to take the implementation of a plan or a strategy is going to be very, very important. Part of the challenge that we have, and we're talking right now around the federal government and maybe sometimes the provincial government too, is funding opportunities follow election cycles, right? Yeah. So we've always advocated, for example, with the federal government to make sure that funding are core, sustainable, and enough, right? But they're always 3 years term, 2 years term, and sometimes it's very difficult to do this work of addressing equity issues in the community by planning for the next 2 years or 3 years, because by the time you do the work and you get to start working, the funding is ending, and then you have to start somewhere else again. So that cycle has been a challenge to address this long-standing, deep-seated systemic issues. The other thing also that we have seen is, because there has not been a strategy or a plan, and maybe something connected to legislation, which I think would make it more long-term, is things are put in policies and legislation. I think that's going to be a very important thing, and I will touch upon that. But most of the resources in communities, and particularly in Black and Indigenous communities, have followed incidents. We had the Summer of Guns in early 2000. We had a significant amount of resourcing and funding, with the Youth Challenge Fund, CEE, NIA, all these groups were funded. We were talking about it earlier on, about 150 plus.
Legacy.
There are only 2 existing, because that was a short-term funding. It ended within 5 years. Those who were well positioned continued, and we have a C now. But many other organizations who did some work died once the funding ended. And then we had the Danzig shooting, and then we had the Black Youth Action Plan, right? So it follows incidents, and it's very reactionary to what we are seeing, and the government does a reactionary thing. It's very transactional, right? And sometimes it's also misplaced. So whenever we have incidents in our communities around violence and safety, the funding is more towards police, right? And I usually use this analogy of the cliff analogy, and people are falling down the cliff, and government responds at the bottom of the cliff. Or we have all these people falling down the cliff. We need more ambulances to take them to the hospital. We need more morgue or things like that. And never think about, why are people falling down the cliff in the first place? Can we at least put a safety net to stop them from falling? Maybe we'll catch some, we will not catch some. Better still, can we move them away from the cliff if we cannot put a fence on the top of it? So all these dynamics of funding, resourcing is challenging to bring about change. We can do some small work here and there, and we will serve, just like you said, you've been, through your law work, legal work, you help one person at a time. But, the impact that you can have is very simple. So I think this strategy with appropriate resourcing, but core long-term funding and resourcing of organization on the ground, doing a lot of work around this. And comparatively to the challenges that we face at the bottom of the cliff, the investment at the top of the cliff is really minimal comparatively. And so I think that strategy should also be part, or the plan should be part of that strategy, to say resourcing on a long-term basis to address these generational issues, right? We're
But
saying,
why don't politicians get that argument? Because it makes sense financially.
it makes sense financially.
You save more money on prevention than the crisis management.
But the other thing that we're facing a lot of times in that conversation is it's very difficult to measure prevention.
Right.
Right? You can measure it maybe in a long term, but in order to make your case, right? But you can measure, some other things, like recovery or treatment plans and things like that is easier. Prevention is more difficult to demonstrate. And that's the thing that we say, like, why do we have to wait until there is a crisis in order to make a case? Does keeping people healthy and well count for something, right? I usually share this example. When we started at Taibu, we had some funding from the ministry around diabetes education program. And the criteria for that education program is that you have to be 40, at risk of diabetes or pre-diabetes to be part of the program. And we had a target that we needed to meet, 1,000 clients per year. I said to the team that we just started, they were very concerned to say, well, are we going to get 1,000 clients? And I said, look, for our case, we can't go out, do outreach with people and say, you're at risk of diabetes. Do you know your status? Have you been screened? And if they say, yeah, I'm okay, I can't say to them, okay, do whatever you're doing right now in your lifestyle. When you get diagnosed with diabetes, come and see us. Like, it doesn't make sense. So I told the team, I said, go out, do your outreach. For us, all Black people and South Asian communities in Malvern are all pre-diabetes. That's our standing. So every person you speak to and engage and provide them with information, access, education, whatever it is, counts as our client. Because we're not going to wait for somebody to get diabetes. Right? It doesn't make sense. The funding model does not make sense. So prevention is very difficult to measure, but that's the best way that we can keep. So like we were talking earlier, if we had from birth, I was thinking about school, but now I'm going to think about birth, right? If we are able to support the parents, to be able to have all the capacity, resource, financially, otherwise, to be able to bring their children in a very positive way with good identity, image, and confidence and stuff when they go to school, that's where the funding should happen, right? Not wait until there's suspension in schools and we say, oh, we have disproportionate suspension in schools, 40%, and then we try to do an intervention there. Maybe we'll be successful, but already we're past any change hope. So I think the prevention, funding of prevention and wellness, long-term funding, like 3 years, 4 years, really does not bring about systemic transformation. And then, so those are the kind of dynamics, I think, in terms of organizations. And as Nicholas was saying, it has to be with organizations that reflect the community, that do the communities. And we've seen, like, big institutions have access to people and money. And they just, they're asked the amount of money they need. It happens. We know that this is happening. Agapi may give a lot of example if he wants to. But this happens, right? People are called to say, there's some money, how much money do you need, right? Whereas I know a lot of grassroots community organizations, they have to apply, and then there are so many questions asking, what does this mean? And surveillance and monitoring.
And competing against each other.
Against each other, right? So I think that needs to be part of the strategy and transformation.
I'll just highlight that, we have the privilege of living in Toronto, where things move fast, money does flow. What this looks like for Black Canadians in small communities, where it's predominantly white, where there are not infrastructures, where there are not organizations that receive funding, and normally it's community or church groups who are doing this work, they don't have the benefits that we have of living in Toronto. So it's going to look very different for them. So if they don't have certain things supporting them, if we think it's bad here, imagine if there's no voice, if there's no one listening. Agapi Gasessa, the EDSC, went on a study tour last year, and she visited Black communities around. And she can tell you firsthand what the workforce looks like. It doesn't look the same as it looks in Toronto. The jobs, the communities, they all look different, right? So I'll add that too.
I always say at Taibu, when we're engaging, we're very privileged. We're thankful that we're privileged with all the challenges that we have, but you're right. Small grassroots community organizations, rural communities, and now our demographic is also changing, right? Not even going too far. Durham a few years ago was a completely different demographic than it is now, right? So if now you're moving into Durham, the challenges that you face with school boards and all those kind of things and healthcare, right? So the more you move further out with smaller number and representation of Black communities, it's a huge, huge significant
Okay, I'm
challenge.
feeling really good now because, you know, when
Oh, no.
I don't live in Toronto, right? And you know what we say about you Torontonians, eh?
Yeah.
That you guys think you're the center of the universe, right?
Kinda.
So it's kind of. No, but it's interesting that you bring up smaller communities because you're right on. I can speak about Cornwall, which is 48,000 people, and has a Black community, but it's harder. And they have smaller community organizations that are fighting for a smaller amount of money. I was in Yellowknife in February. Yellowknife has a Black community, but it's a struggle, and they want to feel connected to what's going on in Toronto. They want to have more information. So you're exactly right to bring that point up, and I appreciate you doing it and not me having to do it.
No. But I think that's what the strategy should incorporate and identify
Absolutely.
those point of focus of where
Very good point.
the plan should address.
Very good point.
Nicholas, what's your thoughts on this question?
I think Liban mentioned a couple of these points, and I just want to focus on one of them, really expanding on it, and that is really institutionalizing the funding, because it's always sunset funding. We know quite a bit of those funding are coming up now, and the government's not renewing it. Right now, the community has to go and fight for those funding. So really creating permanent structures, right? And I hope we can get to that. The report talks about establishing permanent structures to be the central coordinating body for a lot of this work, including funding. So having a separate agency or a department to be able to ensure funding across the board. Most Black organizations rely on single source. So government could play a critical role in creating different sources by partnering with private sector, philanthropic organizations, and creating a structure that there's multiple streams of income, and it's not relied on government. It's government supported, it's government backed, but there are a variety of entities that organizations, nonprofit can tap into to have that long-term funding. And a few years funding is not enough to hire and give job security to staff. I come from a trade union background, so job security and providing permanent opportunities for staff is important, and you can't do that with sunset funding. And so it's really important to institutionalize the funding model, providing permanent funding, ensuring there are more endowments where it's permanent.
Yeah.
We don't have to worry about it ending at some point, and where are we going to go to next?
I think that's a great point. I think it ties back to Liban in terms of prevention, of looking at it a bit differently, of what is, colonialism has a savior complex to it, where they want to be the solution for everything rather than being part of the progression. And so I think those are they complement each other nicely.
Yeah, sometimes they're also saying, here is the money, go solve the problem. It's got nothing to do with us, right? And that is also a challenge for us. We didn't create the problem. The system created the problem. They should also be part. Yes, the financial support helps us to do certain things, but they should be part of the engagement, the work that needs to be. So one of the, I was talking about the 3 pillars of, and maybe I didn't speak about it, but for us, some of the principles that we follow is anti-Black racism is the root of all challenges. So we have to use that lens in order to address the challenges we face in our communities. Afrocentricity is very important. So bringing the values and the culture and the principles that we have in all that we do. so that we're not just spectators of what is happening, but we're also actively participating in the change. And then the third principle is the system transformation. If the system does not change, we will always be looking for money to do the programs that we're doing, and the system is going to produce the disproportionality and inequities that is happening. So if the school is not changing, or the criminal justice is not changing, or the healthcare is not changing, we will be, as organizations, we will be looking for money to do what we're doing on an ongoing basis. So, that's the kind of thing that we need to think about, that the system also should be part of the solution.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to do one last question, and I'll open up to all of you for your different perspectives on this. The report outlines a series of potential legislative changes to the Criminal Justice Code, Control of Drugs and Substance Act, and the Immigration and Refugee Act. Based on your different perspectives and experiences, which legislation changes proposed in the act, in the strategy, do you think is most effective to change? Whoever wants to pick it up first can.
Well, I'll go first. I think when we look at all of these proposed legislation, they're all very important, and they all have a unique role to play depending on which part of the Black population you're at. When we talk about deportation, people from African countries face faster deportation. There is some subjectiveness in legislation and how it's being applied, and that agency that applies the act. So I think when we talk about the Immigration Refugee Protection Act, the government could adopt measures that when it comes to deportation, there's a slower process, more understanding those systemic barriers. But you spoke earlier about when we talk about the determinants, if we go back to even there, one of the measures, and it's not one of these legislative points, but there are other legislative points that the framework talks about, and it talks about recognition of Black people. So if we go even further back, you talked about the baby stages of where this starts. If we go even further back, the recognition of Black people in employment equity legislation, which is, we have a real opportunity right now. Canada has agreed to recognize Black people as a designated group, which means Black people will not be considered part of the racialized category anymore, where they're often excluded from opportunities. So if we go back even further back, we're talking about this piece of legislation covers 1 million workers across Canada, right? And not just federally regulated, but the banking system, not just public service workers, but talking about the banking system, the transportation sector. So Canada has agreed to do that, but it has not done it as yet. So we're concerned that it may not be done, especially with a potential government change coming up. But that type of legislative change at the preventative stage, ensuring people could be properly considered for good employment. There's a quote that's on the wall there, creating a society and an economy in which Black youth can have financial prosperity and a quality of life to live a prosperous life. And that piece of legislation ensures that Black people have that good access. So I think that at the preventative stage is very important, ensuring that people could provide for their families, can send their children to good school, can live in good communities. So I think from that perspective, that piece of legislation is critical.
Thank you. I'll follow that. And I agree, Nicholas, that all of the pieces are equally important. I'll speak to the criminal code because the reality of our situation is the system as we know it does not make sense. Mm-hmm. It does not serve us. I think we need to reimagine who we are quick to call offenders and understand them as folks who have been offended by a system that was never set up to support them. And I think once we reimagine and we rehumanize folks who have engaged in criminal activity, then we treat them differently. We do things differently. We set up policies differently that can actually support them while they're inside and when they come out. Like when we rehumanize and when we reimagine who the offenders are, then we, even inside, like we don't treat them as though they are these single story individuals and all they've ever done is evil, right? Like we understand that they're coming from a place of all the social determinants that we've spoken about. Like we understand that they're not just quote unquote criminals, but they're actually brilliant Black minds who just need an opportunity to blossom and to bloom into the best version of themselves. Like we understand that once they're in there, we're not doing society any favors by keeping folks locked up. Like it doesn't serve our society in any way, shape, or form. If you're going to take somebody away, then when you present them back, they ought to be a better version of themselves. Right. Where's the rehabilitation? Where is the reparative work that you're doing in community so that when folks come back out, that we're not just getting somebody who has been further broken down by the system, but we're getting somebody who has been built up, who has been rehabilitated, who has been rejuvenated, who has been equipped to now become a better contributing member of society. Because when you send them back out, you've made them worse than when they went in, which is what the system has done in the first place. You haven't given them, and you're not giving the society and the families that they're coming back to anything substantial to hold on to. If we reimagine the criminal code, if we reimagine how we treat folks who are incarcerated, if we reimagine that, then even the folks, the children, the younger brothers, the younger sisters, the families that they're leaving behind will have different outcomes, because we know that the studies are there. When children grow up in homes where they see cycles and patterns of incarceration, whether it's by a parent or by an uncle or brother, in their formative years, that becomes their norm and they are more likely to enter into the system. How are we treating quote unquote criminals so that they can break this cycle that the system, the society has created, so that those folks that are looking on them see, okay, one generation, I've seen dad do that or whoever do that in an earlier life, but he's not that person now. Second generation comes on, they haven't seen that. It's not their story, it's a distant story. Third generation comes in, it's completely foreign to them, because we have to understand that the work that we're doing is not just for here and now, but that we're talking about impacting generations. Right. So I think once that gets changed, a lot will also get changed.
One connection that I'll make between what you were just saying, Adana, and what Nicholas was saying Black folks need to be protected as a different class. So you were saying rehumanize people who are labeled as offenders. No, we need to rehumanize Black Canadians, because the whole reason why we're disproportionately in those situations is people are not seeing us as our white counterparts. Right? So I will add that to what you're saying and connect you to and say it doesn't start at rehumanizing offenders. It starts at rehumanizing us as Black Canadians are just as equal as anyone else, because we get higher sentences. All of those things happen, right? We get convicted when there was no crime, right? Those numbers are higher. So it's about rehumanizing Black Canadians as well. Leaving, Senator?
Nothing to add to what has just been said, right? But for me is, because the question says which of the legislative, changes would make the most impact. I think the key thing for me is that there is change in the legislation, and that's where it's gonna remain, right? If it's not, like my mentor, late mentor, Denise Brooks always says that if it's not in legislation or in policy, the chance that anything will take root and bring about change is zero. So anything that is in legislation is also for us to then use that as an accountability measure. So the fact that there's going to be some legislative changes is significant enough as a good starting point.
Okay. The Black men that I met in prison, so many of them were brilliant, are brilliant. They just want to be built back up. So you are exactly right. I'm going to speak now from a politics perspective, because that's where I live. when I was mayor of Cornwall during the pandemic, and we do enjoy crisis management, I have to tell you. Governments feel very efficient and effective when they're doing crisis management. Prevention
and important.
important. Prevention, not so much. So there is a problem. So George Floyd was murdered. We were all watching that as it was happening. And all across the world, there were protests and marches, and there was a march in Cornwall. 1,000 people showed up to march in Cornwall. And I marched, and I handed out masks, and I marched with the chief of police. And I was severely criticized because people said, well, you've been telling us to stay home. We don't know about this disease. And I said, yeah, but this is Black Lives Matter, and Black people are having a time when we want to talk about our issues and when we want to take up space. And they said, yeah, but aren't you the mayor for everybody? Are you just the mayor for Black people? And I had to, in that moment, understand how to speak about my identity. Yes, I am the mayor for everyone. But in this moment, I am a Black woman. And I'm going to take up political space as a Black woman. And so that has taught me that this is a moment that we are going to have to take up together. So legislation, I want to speak to that specifically. Our criminal code has not been reviewed since 1955. Now, we have amended it piece by piece by piece over the years, leading to a lot of overrepresentation of Black Canadians in prisons and in the justice system generally. So my long-term vision is we have to review the criminal code with a 2024 and beyond lens, where we now understand what systemic racism has caused, and draft that legislation with those perspectives, the Indigenous perspectives, the Black perspectives, the societal perspectives in mind. So that's a plan. Nicholas, you were talking about Black and racialized, and I just want to give you a very specific example, because I want you to understand how legislation is made, how politics is done. So, I'm a Black senator. I sit on the Transport and Communications Committee. As a senator, we review legislation. It has to come through the Senate before it is passed. Clement Joseph, is she here? So Clement put me in touch with Advance. Did you? Advance, which is a Black music organization. So we were reviewing C11, the Broadcasting Act, trying to bring all of the different online spaces into this Broadcasting Act. And so I had a Black music organization knock on my door and say, the legislation speaks only of racialized communities. We want, as Black musicians, to be recognized as Blacks with particular needs and requirements and contributions to make. She went through Clement. Clement said, who's the Black senator sitting on Transport and Communications? And suddenly I was having conversations around changing the wording in that legislation to not only say racialized, but to say Black and racialized. And guess what? It passed. So, this is how it works. We need representation, but there are some of us around. And as senators, we are not concerned with election cycles. We are appointed till age 75 if that's where we want to be, until age 75. So, you see my face? You know my name. I am 59, just in case you want to know. So that gives me some runway. And that means that every time I go and sit at those committees, I say, I think we talk about this in the Black Justice Strategy. Really? And I get to say that for years. So my promise to you is that I will do that. But I need you. I can't be lonely in those spaces because it is lonely. So I need to hear from you on this. I need to hear what you want to see. Because sometimes it works. You put up your hand and you say, we should say black and racialized.
Mm-hmm.
And then I convince the senators around the table to vote for it, and it passes.
Mm-hmm.
That's how legislation is made. But I need you, and I need Clement, and I need the CEE Center, and I need all of the communities to feed that information into those of us who are trying to represent.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a promise to you. Je vous le promets. I need to hear from you, though.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Senator. That's actually a great segue because I'm done with my questions. And if you guys will indulge us for a bit longer, we've shifted our timeline, but I'd love to open it up for some questions from community. Matthias, are you still in the room? Yeah. Can you pass the mic around?
Yes, I will come to whomever.
Hi, my name is Pat Glowden, and I am part of an organization called EDGE. But what I'd like to find out is the role that the legal aid system play in the incarceration of our young people. Because, okay, my child got in trouble. It cost us $25,000 for the lawyer to find out that they had said something that I said that I never said. What would have happened if that lawyer were not well paid his $500 an hour to go through all of the documents that the police handed in that was a lie? So sometimes I wonder the role of it wasn't legal aid that we had, but the role that the legal aid system is playing in the incarceration of our young people. I just feel there is a connection.
And you know, thank you for that, and thank you for sharing that. That's hard. The Black strategy does speak to the legal aid system and the fact that access to justice without a properly funded legal aid system is important. But it also says that we have to support Black law students and Black lawyers, right? Because again, I'm going to come back to the representation piece. Because the more Black people you have at all of those different levels, the more you're going to get an understanding as a system that there's a power imbalance. So this strategy speaks to that. It could probably go further, but we're going to need to hear more of that to make sure. Because yes, I think the legal aid system is part of this whole system, and there isn't enough funding, there isn't enough representation, there isn't enough thought that goes into long-term planning around that. Yeah.
To follow on that, so for those who know, I'm Jamar Kamar Hewitt. I'm the Executive Director of the Black Legal Action Center.
Woohoo!
I am legally. Certainly, I don't speak on behalf of the clinic system and not on behalf of legal aid, obviously not. But I speak on behalf of the work that we do in relation to the Black Justice Strategy. So for those of us who may or may not know the Black Justice Strategy, the Black Legal Action Center was quote-unquote one of the founding partners. We're talking about founding partners this morning, right? And Maya Teklu, which is my predecessor. Yes, certainly is one of those members that worked on the Black Justice Strategy. And if you go on the website, we are referenced there quite a lot. So the work that we've been tasked to do, and yes, we have been engaged by the federal government on different projects to build capacity, to build resources, to offer assistance to members of our community, legal members, professional members of our community, to raise these issues, to advance Black causes through litigation, build resources around it. So that's the work that we've been tasked to do, and we have been at it for a little while now. I think we're a year plus, going 2 years in. We do have another year to get it wrapped up. It's a lot of work. It is very involved work. We recognize that the benefit that now that we have the strategy and we're able to see that, and we're slowly trying to rework some of the things that we're doing. But we recognize that in our justice system, one of the areas that we, in addition to representation, but culturally appropriate representation is something that we are missing, right? Certainly, and I'm not saying that you have to be a Black lawyer to raise Black causes, but you must be familiar and knowledgeable with Black culture to raise anti-Black racism issues. So that's one of the areas that we are digging deeper into. So to the extent that we can help another Black person going through the justice system, whomever that lawyer is on the other side, know how to recognize where there's anti-Black racism involved, knowing how to raise those issues at the different levels of the justice system. Certainly, in every aspect of the justice system, if there is racism, there is a mechanism to raise that argument and get that protection that you need. Oftentimes, we are not so familiar with them, or we're not, in addition to not being able to identify them, we do not know how to articulate them and how to get the adjudicator, the judge, whomever sits on the other side, to recognize that this is an active factor that must be considered in, granting whatever remedy or decision that you're making. So certainly, I think we're making open calls. Certainly, we welcome the input. Feel free to reach out to us to find out what we're doing on a particular issues, because we do recognize that there, notwithstanding that we are the only mandated Black legal funded clinic, and our mandate is to fight anti-Black racism, our team certainly might not recognize all the issues that the community is facing. We do have the listening sessions, but we get the information from persons who participate in those listening sessions. And we always welcome, emails, touch points to tell us if there's something else that we should be considering, or we can say, yeah, that's a part of it. Oh, we never thought of that before. Thanks for bringing it to us, so that we can continue the work. We still have another year to go, so you still have time to call. Okay.
Thank you for sharing that. I'll just highlight, yeah, absolutely. I'll just give you a tagline for that. The time for allies is done. It's time for accomplices, right? So what are you going to do with that information that we've been saying for all this time? Are you going to action it? Are you going to create system change yourself and not just stand by and watch, right? Yeah.
Thank you for this discussion. It's really wonderful. Thank you to CEE, of course, always. I think the question I'm going to ask is one of someone who struggles.
Who are you again?
Pardon me?
We don't know. Who are you?
I'm a community member. So my name is Kemba Bai. I'm a manager of the Confronting Anti-Black Racism Unit. I'm here with my colleague Yao Togobo, who is a community development officer. And my question is going to really straddle how we navigate what it means to be in government and be of community. And specifically, Brother Lieben, you mentioned in terms of how we move beyond over-policing and looking at the structural determinants of health. You said there are three kind of determinants that you look at. You said prevention, you said restoration. I didn't hear the third one. I was wondering if you could talk a bit more about that, because I know that dismantling the system is our goal. Some of us, not all of us. But, the more immediate responses has to come outside of the system. So wanted to hear you talk more about that. And the third determinant.
So thank you, sister. So prevention, restoration, and advancement. And advancement is more about, creating that space of health and well-being on a long-term basis, whereby communities are empowered and using the principle of self-determination to be able to own their decision, their well-being, right? So we're moving from, if we can prevent, that's good. Yes, many of us get, impacted by the system, so we need to get restored. But the idea is that we need to move towards this advancement space where we keep maintaining and sustaining our health and well-being. So that's the kind of long-term vision. And then the second part is, so we organize the Black Mental Health Conference on an annual basis in March. It started as a part of the project, and the communities now have said, we need to have this on an annual basis. So we're trying to do that, finding resources and be able to do that. But Last year, at the opening ceremony, the indigenous elder brought messages from the ancestors, and she said to the audience, we should stop trying to fix or fight the system. The theme of the conference was rest as liberation. And so her message was, you need to stop fighting the system and trying to fix the system because it's too tiring, it's toxic, it's not leading you to your rest. We need to build something new. So I think the message was about, we need to create this transformation of a new space for us, and it has to take place with, it has to start where we are in our communities, build it up, and then influence how the system is going to engage with communities. I think that's because we've all I don't know, many of us, and I also see another brother there who has been doing this work, I don't know, from, Brother Donovan is there, for so long, and the system does not even budge, right? And we get tired. We lost a great brother and elder recently who's been fighting for 40 years around youth violence, and we have many other who are struggling right now because the system does not move at all. And I also say at the same time that we have a window of opportunity. I think COVID, Black Lives Matter movement, all those kind of things have created spaces, and we've moved some needles. But if we don't try to kind of create the system for ourselves and this as community and influence what is happening in the system, I think it's going to be a very difficult thing. What I wanted to say was, after George Floyd, all organizations, big, small, corporations, institutions, healthcare, they all have now an EDI department in their organization. Like it's the flavor of like the buzz thing. And a lot of our people went into these EDI positions with great excitement, anticipation, like we're gonna get this done, and they were hit like with a brick of wall. Nothing is moving. And the danger also is now that the system has learned the language, right? The CEOs like talk EDI like sometimes even better than what we experience on a daily basis. And that presents a situation where we think that, oh, this organization has changed because now the CEO or the VP or something like that are talking all this EDI language. So we need to be a little bit more so we need to create that space, those areas of where we can come together and do that, and then engage with systems so they can respond to us.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions?
Thank you. Yeah, we have one here. Please introduce.
Hi, my name is Dana Williams. I'm a clinical nurse specialist. I'm at Taibu IS Circle of Care. Please don't hide it.
You can't ask me questions.
I want to speak about the youth justice. Couple months ago, I was the first Black nurse in the healthcare at Royal Metro Youth Center. So I built the healthcare, found that there's many issues that are plaguing the system, and just even that organization itself. We had youths that are coming in. Most of the youths get engaged in most of the criminal activity because they're not doing well in school. Why are they not doing well in school? They had an unidentified learning disability. They had unaddressed mental health issues, and they had trauma. None of that is addressed. They now come into the jail there, the closed custody. We spoke to administration about separating the gangs, right? Because what's going to happen is they're going to come in there, they're going to see their op or their, who they're arguing with, fights are ensued. Terrible fights. Like I had literally responded to an average of 5 cold blues a day, and they were all fights, right? So now, and that doesn't include the fights that were set up by the officers. Now let's talk about the officers. You get in there, the majority of the officers are white. They've come from, a lot of them came from Hamilton detention, so they already came with their racialized and different types of attitudes, which trickled down. And even if there was black officers there's a blue wall of silence, so you can't go against that, right? We had one gentleman who really tried to fight it, and literally they traumatized that officer till he had to quit, right? He found dead rats, all kinds of things in his locker, blah, 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 blah. Then when their youths are in there, they are now connecting with other youths who are doing bigger and better things. So now I've made a connection that when I go out, for me, if I'm now coming in for a simple petty charge, I'm now going to get in connection with someone else where I'm going to make more money. Because whatever you're saying, it's all about them trying to make more money, right? Because McDonald's minimum wage is not working. So they're making a connection. They have needs that are not addressed. They gave us a psychiatrist 1 day a week for 4 hours, 496 youth. Right? So how is he going to address any of their mental issues? How are they going to address?
Black psychiatrist?
No. Right? Eventually, our healthcare became more diverse. I have to thank Norma Nicholson, who was the manager there. And we brought in a lot more black nurses. Now, when you look at the healthcare, because I still keep in touch with them, it's very much more diverse. It has more black nurses there. So we're taking care of their healthcare needs a lot better. Diet-wise, we had to fight because all they did was give them fried foods. And I said, well, guess what? There is 96% black youths here. Most of them are Caribbean descent. You're giving them hot dogs and fries. Where is their cultural foods? So when I worked the weekends, out of my money, I cooked. I made sure there was halal and whatever else for the other, or vegan for who was there. I cooked and brought in for the cottages that I served. That then it came bigger because then they wanted me to do for all of the cottages, which is fine. So then it became now, kind of showing us up. So now they're like, okay, well, if you reach a certain level, so we had silver, gold, and platinum. If you can behave, whatever level you got, you can then order in food. They didn't even have appropriate soap or cream for their skin. So we saw a lot of kids with dermatitis and all kinds of things because the soap was harsh. Like it was not a cultural appropriate place. And it continues to be a non-cultural appropriate place because they only allow you to do so much because overarching says, well, guess what? It's not the same at all the youth jails, so you can't do these certain things anymore. But guess what? Further up north, I think it's Blue Water. I don't know if that one's still open, but there's not as much black youths there, right? So it didn't make sense that you're saying, well, now we have to go back to fries and hot dogs, right? So they go in, they're beat down by the officers. On a Cold Blue, it's a free-for-all. They got excited when they heard a Cold Blue. Like I've had an officer literally run into a Sally Port door, dislocate his shoulder, because he got excited because he got to run to go stamp on a young black youth. Wow. It is nothing more than hell on earth in there for these kids. And then people wonder why they come out more angry. Mm-hmm. And all that means is that they continue to perpetuate that behavior. They age out of the youth system, and now they're in the adult correctional system. Okay? And if they're identified as having a mental health, then they go into the forensic mental health system. I won't talk about that because that's a whole nother thing, because I also work at Ontario Shores.
Wow.
So we need to address them from school. We need, as she said, from birth, and get things in place. I grew up in a prior neighborhood. We had a wonderful program. It was called, I think it was called Night Program, but it gave us something after school to do, right? But it was the teachers that volunteered and put it up. We had computers, we had games, we had arts and crafts, we had whatever. By that time it was finished. So you got to go home, you had your dinner. If you didn't have dinner when you came, they had some kind of snack or food there for you, for those kids who, you know, maybe had, or latchkey kids and they had parents who worked. By the time you went back home, it's time, literally, it's time for you to go to bed. So there was no time for us to be on the road to make trouble. And that's all I have to say, sir.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you. And thank you for doing that work. Okay, I think we have one more quick question, if anyone else wants to go.
So, Agapi, I am the executive director here at CEE. I just want to encourage all of us who are here today that I think this is the beginning, the very, very beginning of a conversation. I mean, Black Opportunity Fund had the authors of this strategy come out and talk to community for a consultation. However, I want us to pay attention to what's happening. Number one, there's a conversation being had around when we're going to be deciding when young people then are charged as adults. And we know what that looks like south of the border. We also have a, help me out, Senator, what is the...
Bill C-40, the Miscarriage of Justice Act. Yeah.
So Bill C-40, the Miscarriage of Justice Act, which is really around people who have been wrongfully accused and what that's going to look like for them. We have this strategy. We have what Nicholas is working on in terms of the Black action and the discrimination around employees. So I think that there's a lot of things that are happening, and all of these things make up what reform looks like. So let us not be distracted by one thing and let people say, oh, look what's happening over there, while they pass all of these things over here. And so I think that what my call to our community is that we stay vigilant. And when they say, there's like a new saying, we rise at dawn, or we what is it?
We ride at dawn.
We ride at dawn. Okay. So we all, like if somebody's calling, if Nicholas is having an event and we need community's voice there, we ride at dawn. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And when we are calling to government, there will be a time very soon where we all, and if there's any organizations in here that is not connected, please see Matthias over here, because we need everybody's information. And it's not a conversation about like lawyers and judges and policymakers. It's the young people, because they're missing in the conversation oftentimes. It's the service organizations that are serving these young people. It's the parents, it's the aunties, it's the uncles, it's the detention center workers, it's the nurses who are in the detention centers. Like, it's everybody's conversation. And I think we all need to be connected so that when the opportunity arises for, I don't care who, to be quite honest, whether it's a liberal, whether it's an NDP, whether it's a conservative, all I need all of you to know is that we ride at dawn. So if you think that you're going to pass a train past us, that's not going to happen. So what we need to do as community is actually mobilize, and we need to be able to say, it does not matter who you are. If you want to move left or right, we tell you where you're going to move, right or left. So when we make the call, and we all have to be with one sound, one voice, we have a little bit of a difficulty with that in our community. One voice, one sound, we ride at dawn. That's all I have to say.
We ride at dawn.
Thanks, Agapi. I want to say thank you to our panel. Thank you, Senator, for coming from Cornwall. Thank you, Nicholas and Adana, and leaving. These conversations are incredibly important to have and incredibly impactful, because It allows us to come out of the work that we're doing and share, and also hear experiences that we've never heard before, undo the lies that are being told to us on a day-to-day basis, whether it's from news, whether it's from the institutions. So I want to say thank you. I also want to say thank you to community for coming. We love having community here at CEE. So anytime you guys get the opportunity, please come. And also just a shout out to our team behind the scenes who put this together. Thank you very much. And that's it for us today.
Thank you all. Thank you all.